Okay, so it's lunch at Civic Hall, and we're going to have a talk now from Mark Pesce. So those of you who need to keep working will work quietly. Those of you who are interested in engaging or actually taking a break from work, which is always a good thing to do, especially if you're eating. We all know that eating and listening is better than eating and working. Come join. This is being live streamed also. How is it actually available, Jolie?
It's on the Civic Hall YouTube.
It's on our. So if you go to YouTube and search for Civic Hall, you can actually help share the live stream. I did say to our guest speaker, you know, how would you feel if we put it up on Facebook Live? And he kind of twitched involuntarily at the irony of doing that. This is my friend Mark Pesce. Mark is briefly visiting New York from Australia. He moved to Australia many years ago in anticipation of events that are still unfolding, hopefully not in the direction that he was anticipating. And as he was telling me, things in Australia are also problematic. Mark first got on our radar many years ago with a blog he was writing called Hyperpolitics, which was about the ways that the internet was warping our politics. I think I first learned about Anonymous from a talk that Mark gave at Personal Democracy Forum at least 7 or 8 years ago. I believe it was the first time that any of us heard about Anonymous, well before their moment on the international stage. And it's always a treat to hear what's on Mark's mind. The last time he was here, about a year and a half or two ago, he had just visited Rwanda and came back with stories about how a country that has literally been torn apart by genocide was healing or trying to heal and learning how to deal with difference at the level of what had just happened there. He's been spending a lot of time more recently thinking and writing about our new digital overlords. And the title for this talk is his, The Last Days of Reality. It's going to be provocative. What we're going to do is Mark's going to talk for about 15 minutes, listen in, and then we'll get into a dialogue, Q&A. So come closer if you're interested in that. And if you do need to talk noisily, go over there. Okay, Mark, stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Mark. Thank you, Miguel. So just to start off with, I want to make an observation, which if you were here for Zainab last night, you already know that surveillance capitalism is a weird sort of beast, because we have a surveillance capitalism world that's really just watching us continuously so it can very much satisfy our needs. It can know when we need something. But it has some uglier aspects. And you can tell me whether this story made it over here to America. So on the 1st of May, now that's the Australian, they're basically the leading broadsheet. You think the New York Times, but with the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, that's the Australian. It is owned by Murdoch. And a reporter at the Australian had been passed a slide deck from Facebook that they were showing to advertisers. And Facebook said, we know exactly when teenagers are feeling their most vulnerable. We can run an emotional analytic on them, and that's exactly the right moment for you to market them. All right? You did hear about that here. And Facebook can do this because they've got 2 billion profiles that they're building all the time. And these profiles have become literal simulacra. You can think of Facebook in a server somewhere. There's a tiny simulation of you. It's not a complete simulation, but it is a simulation of you running on a Facebook server. And of course, all of that happened because Facebook made a decision, more or less right after they went public, that they needed to increase user engagement. And this was, I think, the original sin here. That process involved curation. And whenever you hear the word curation, I want you to think internally censorship, because that's what it is. Let's call it what it is. And what they did is they would curate the newsfeed and they would carefully monitor the results of that newsfeed. And so Facebook ended up building a machine learning model that learned from its own curation mistakes. Now that sounds very sensible, it sounds very innocuous. Those curations are now highly accurate. Very few mistakes are getting made in the curation. And that means those curations now start to affect the biases and the interests of the users of Facebook. And what this means is that we have literally all become the experimental subjects in a global experiment in cognitive science. Because the thing we didn't know before this happened is we didn't know how much of our culture, like the actual structure of our culture, supported a common description of reality until that common description started to fracture. We never really understood how much of what we believe to be real is a function of what we want to believe until someone built the machinery that was designed to feed all of our cognitive biases. And so what happened has made perfect sense because people see what they want to believe. That's how the news feed works now. We all know this. And because it confirms our biases, we tend to see the news feed as real. Now, the news feed, because of the fact that it's an outcome of all of this stuff that it's learning about you, is very unique for each individual. What it means, I'm coining a phrase here, is that everyone is now very deep in their own personal I don't know. And that's where we are right here at the beginning of November in 2017. It's about to get a lot worse. Now, you may not have heard little things shipped today, the iPhone 10. Does anyone in the room have an iPhone 10? I was wondering whether that was going to be the case. Yes, no one has an iPhone 10 yet? My God, people, you need to re-examine your life choices. All right. So the iPhone 10 comes out. It's a really interesting device because it's the first mass market gadget that points to where we're going with augmented reality. Now, augmented reality is actually the older and more serious brother of virtual reality because it's not about crafting fully synthetic worlds out of the whole cloth. Augmented reality is about blending the real world with the synthetic world. And that is very hard to do well. In fact, it's so hard to do well, we really couldn't even start to do it well until the last couple of years. I want you to remember, again, very obscure mobile game came out last year. You probably won't have heard of it. Pokemon Go. Now, that became an overnight sensation because what it did was it took the real world and overlaid it with this magical realm of Pokemon visible through the smartphone. And people saw the world differently because of what they were seeing through their smartphones. And that magic, in that first month, generated $200 million in revenue, which meant all of the platform companies started to stand up and take notice. Wait a minute, there's something here. We have to figure out what to do about it. And so Facebook and Google and Apple and Snap have all taken on their own augmented reality projects. Now, modern augmented reality is all built around a technology called SLAM. That's simultaneous localization and mapping. So SLAM is how you generate a three-dimensional model of space, so you can put your Pokemon there, you can put something on the wall or whatever. And there's a few different ways that you can do SLAM. They all have one thing in common. They all have to survey whatever space they're operating in. And unless you actually do that scan of that space, and it doesn't happen just once, you have to do it continuously. Augmented reality doesn't work. It can't work. So that means augmented reality is by definition a technology of surveillance. And if you don't remember anything else out of my talk today, I want you to take that one away. It's important because we're going to get shown all sorts of really cool things that you can do with augmented reality. It's unlikely that anyone will be mentioning the price that you're going to be paying for using augmented reality. It's yet another kind of surveillance capitalism. It's the newest leading edge of that. And for example, now this example is particularly relevant today. So the iPhone 10 has the true depth camera. It's a marvel of miniaturization. It accurately maps your face in real time. That's how they can do all the Face ID stuff. It's supposed to be 20 times more unique than a fingerprint. That camera doesn't just scan your face to unlock your phone. It scans your face and then makes that face scan available to any app in the operating system. And Apple, so that means that you can actually map your facial expressions, as you know, onto a pool emoji. And Apple showed that off during the demo. Yes, I know, this is where we are. But you can see, so here's a bit of a movie that should start and is not starting because who knows why. Let's go back. All right, anyway, this is how it all gets... What? No, if it's not playing, it's not playing. Don't worry about it. There's nothing important about it. It just shows how it's doing. This is all Apple's stuff that they're talking to programmers about that shows you that you get 15 frames a second to the operating system of someone's facial expressions. Now, how hard is it going to be for someone to take that stream of facial data and work out how you're feeling as you're looking at the screen of your smartphone? So you see what I mean about this, all right? So not only is it about unlocking your phone, it's now about the fact that your phone has the capacity to watch your emotional play across your face in real time. And that's just a basic feature of every iPhone 10. So, and I want us to talk about this afterward, but the first question I have to ask you, are we now going to need to start to become emotionally guarded around our smartphones because our smartphones are literally going to be watching our emotions? Again, this is augmented reality as a technology of surveillance. Now, we've seen a whole bunch of very simple augmented reality apps. If you have iOS 11 on your reasonably modern iPhone, you can download them. They're things that will measure walls for you, tell you how tall someone is. You can put a synthetic painting on the wall. Of course, other people have much bigger plans for augmented reality. Oh, there it goes. See, now it's actually starting. So that's actually showing you what's being generated by the camera, by the true depth camera in real time. Okay. There we go. So in May, during his big developer conference, Zuckerberg spends about the first 20 minutes at his developer conference talking about augmented reality as the new frontier for Facebook. And he described the camera on the smartphone as the new interface to augmented reality. And Zuckerberg talked about how he wanted every blank wall on every building in the world to be covered with art. And you could do this now using Facebook's augmented reality tools. And of course, when he takes this position, he's basically saying to Facebook's users that he wants all of those users to have the best possible view of the world. I've started to see Zuck as a bit of a digital Pollyanna. I think that's actually one way to sort of frame his public persona, because he always sees the good in everything he does. But what happens when someone writes hate speech on a wall? What happens when someone uses AR to single out the home of a political dissident or an immigrant? Those are questions we need to be asking right now, because those technologies are now in the smartphone. And so we have to wonder about whether this confusion of synthetic space and real space is going to empower communities in the real world, and which communities they're going to empower. And this is where Facebook and Apple and Google and Snap, this is where those companies leave their clouds and actually start having an impact on the way we work in the real world. And it's something that I'm trying to sort of figure out what to call it. Right now I'm calling it digital colonization. Do you know about this? This is the big Jeff Koons piece that Snap has installed via AR in Central Park. So if you go grab the Snap app and go into Central Park, you can see where Snap has just decided they're going to put a Jeff Koons piece. That's it. It's digital colonization. And these companies are now going to start editing the world. And of course, some of that's going to be, they're going to say for safety's sake, so that we don't see anything we shouldn't be seeing, anything that wouldn't disturb us too much, anything that would decrease our engagement with these systems. Obviously, they don't want that. Augmented reality is a new surveillance technology with the same ideas driving it. It's the same techniques of observation, it's the same techniques of reinforcement learning, and the amplification of cognitive bias. And they're following us into this new medium, which is now on, given the number of iPhones that can run it, something probably around 300 million devices that are already out there in the world. Now, where we're going, the smartphone is only the halfway point here. Where we're going is something that's going to be seen not through a smartphone, but through something that looks like a very comfortable pair of tiny sunglasses. Now, that's the HoloLens. That's Microsoft's attempts at it. That's 3 years old already, okay? That's the first pass of something, and if you've used it, it's a remarkable device. But it's big, and it's clunky, and it's heavy, because all technology starts that way. But there's about, I guess if you take the market capitalization of all of the companies working in augmented reality right now, there's about $3 trillion of companies that are working toward creating something that's going to look a lot more like spectacles. This is exactly what Zuckerberg was talking about at F8. This is the image he's presenting. They're going to look like a fancy pair of sunglasses, and you're going to put them on, and they're going to be consistently scanning that world and in real time either adding or taking things away from the view of the world. And all of that time, they're going to be streaming all of this detailed information about where you are and who you're with and what you're doing and feeding that back to the company that's generating the view of the world, because that's how these systems are designed to work. All right, so what do you see through these spectacles? Well, Facebook will naturally want you to be engaging all the time. They'll want you to be wearing all these spectacles all the time, so they will guarantee that what you're seeing through those spectacles is what you want to see. Your spectacles will be editing reality in real time. And you'll be seeing what you wanted to see, because guess what? Facebook already knows what you want to see. That's what they're putting into your news feed. And it's going to learn even more the longer you're wearing those spectacles, by looking at your gaze, by looking at what's drawing your attention. And this isn't a metaphor about where we're going. This is actually where we are right now. We don't have the fancy spectacles yet. But you can think of them almost as a bit of a gimmick out of a Black Mirror episode. We already live in the reality that's the curated news feed. And that curation is simply going to leap off the smartphone screen and plaster itself over the real world in real time with these spectacles. And then we're going to be in an era that I'm calling the post-real. We're already most of the way there. Now, I've laid out all of this and a lot more and tied in a whole bunch of other stuff around politics and Cambridge Analytica and all of this in an 8,000-word article that's coming out at the end of the month in a journal in Australia called Meanjin. You are the first people in the world to see that cover. I got permission from the editor yesterday. All right, he's going to premiere it in Australia next week. It's going to be published online in February, and everyone will be able to read it. So I've tried to outline some of the problem of where we are. I reckon it's actually important, and one of the reasons I wanted to come and talk with you today, not just at you, is to talk about how we might want to start to remediate some of this. You know, a lot of this is just, it's the curse of algorithmic culture. I personally don't think that Facebook had any real sense of the consequential nature of news feed curation. I don't think they understood where it would go. I mean, they do now, certainly. They absolutely do. Come on, Mark. There we go. But they're trapped. If Facebook changes, user engagement decreases, and their revenues drop. Okay, so what do we do here? How do we change this? Because the post-real is already consuming our culture. These fractures are a result of our beginning to be post-real. So there are questions now about the kinds of institutions that we need when you have the civic pillars of responsible government, a free press, and community engagement. If you just take those three, how do those three things function in a post-real world? And these are the questions we need to ask. How do we connect across these fractures in reality that have been produced by these cognitive bias amplifiers? How do we build consensus in that world? How do we continue as a coherent civilization in that world? We are very good with our tools these days. We are less good at dealing with the consequences.
Okay. Time for discussion and responses. I'm going to just start and ask Mark, how different is this from, say, the situation we faced when Microsoft was the dominant platform and we were all locked in, and Microsoft was using its market power to, in effect, make everybody have to use its browser, and then the government acted, right? So you're painting a very dark scenario, and I think the first question that is on a lot of people's minds is, aren't there ways to push back? And in particular, what the Europeans are doing around the general data privacy regulation and how that you may need to spell that out a little bit. So talk about that.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, so this actually may be a slightly long answer. So in 2010, Dana Boyd, has Dana been here to talk at any point? Okay, yeah. Okay, good. So Dana Boyd, who has been studying social networks with teenagers the early 2000s, wrote a blog post in which she said, Facebook is now a utility because you can't have conversations on Facebook and utilities get regulated. So that was sort of the first entree. You know who else said that back in July this year? Steve Bannon, exactly. So this is now being floated around as a thought bubble that if you have something that has that kind of power, do you regulate it? There's an enormous danger here that John Robb has written about, which is that the tie-up could happen that if Facebook agrees to be regulated, the price they're paying is that in return, they will offer governments social stability through editing, all right, which is exactly what Tencent does in China right now. It's how they operate. And so if there is going to be regulation, we have to look at the fine print of that deal for all of the parties very carefully around that, okay? I want to sort of get that out there as a sort of basic idea. I'm trying to remember what else that all connects to. It connects to a bunch of stuff. Oh yeah, that's right, okay. So one of the things that we don't know is how much the web we have today is not the web we wanted because it did get monopolized very early on. And so you saw Mozilla essentially get, or probably Netscape essentially get crushed. And so the idea of having a web that might be very different than we have today, but we don't know because we didn't go that path, sort of became an instrument of commercial dominance for at least a period of time. So there is a lot around that we don't know, and that may in fact have affected the world that we're in now. So it may have been a much more consequential act than even we understand, and it's kind of hard to know for sure around that. Tim Berners-Lee is incredibly, I think, frustrated and hurt by the direction the web has taken, and he's got the Solid project at MIT, which is an effort to be able to collect and own your own profile data. And I think that is incredibly worthwhile, but it is not so much it glosses over, but you're still inside of a world where everything else is collecting data to profile you. And unless you stop that, and I don't know how necessarily to stop that, unless you stop that, while it's good to have your own profile data and to feel like you have agency there, I don't know that it necessarily prevents other people from gathering data and weaponizing that data against you. The EU is presenting some really interesting options because they're large enough to go up against the platform monopolies and just say, no, you're going to have to do things differently here. Can they create enough space and enough, I guess, development around how to regulate these that we can all learn something from them? I'm hoping so, and when I speak to anyone in an EU country who's in that area, I strongly support their efforts in this because I think they're at least creating the space for dialogue that then perhaps the Americans, perhaps the Australians can actually look to as frameworks for regulation. But this, I think we're still in the very early stages of this.
One more question, and then we're going to open it up, which is, I'm thinking about the people who are here at Civic Hall on a regular basis and the work that they do, and I want to push you a little bit to explain why they should care. If you are, building a app that helps people better access social services that they're entitled to, or if you're building and training people who do movement organizing, and probably have to use Facebook as part of what they do. Why should, for lots of people who are not up at the 35,000-foot level that you see, what does this mean in their everyday lives and the work that they try to do to make the world better? Why should we, who have those kinds of daily focus, be worried about this?
Well, I mean, when you talk about something that has colonized a lot of the social communication space, all right, in the world, there's no nuance there. You are either fully involved in that communication space or you're not, right? And so there's a shunning. You actually have to shun yourself in order to be able to say, okay, I'm not going to participate in that platform. I'm not going to participate in that form of surveillance. Now, I mean, I have this in my own personal life. I'm a radical fairy. The radical fairies in Australia all organize on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook. They will email me when they remember, oh, there's this event going on. You need to come over and come to it, which bless them, they actually do on a fairly regular basis. But I don't participate in the active discussions or anything in that community because I'm not on Facebook. And so some of that's just at the interpersonal level that we have had any agency about making a decision in this removed. And I feel like a lot of community organizations need to not default to Facebook, but think about what is appropriate. One of the things that happened, and you saw this, we stopped building community tools for connecting communities when Facebook came along because it just became easy and everyone went over there. That's us, that we didn't keep that going. And I think we're actually going to need to put energy into reinventing that, because if you're trying to do organization and someone else owns the means of that organization, you are subject to them. All right? You've lost any agency. And if you're doing something that doesn't agree with it, strand it over. And if you don't look to any other alternatives, and because we haven't built those other alternatives, everything else is simply too hard because you're trying to do activism, you're not trying to build a communications platform, then we have a real
Alternative. I mean, what do you use? What do you consider safe?
Signal. I mean, okay, just at that level of paranoia, and it was really funny watching all of the American friends drop onto Signal after the election. It was like, bam, oh, good, all the Americans are on now. So, I mean, Signal, the nice thing about Signal is we could actually take Signal. Signal can do messaging in groups, all right? It can do all of this. We're not really using that. We're not necessarily stressing it, but of course it's open, it's inspectable. The cryptographers, nothing's ever perfect, right? But it's good enough, and that's kind of all you're ever going to get from secure comms and things like that. So I think it's, what you're doing is you're asking the right question. I don't necessarily know that I have the perfect answer, but I think we need to start asking these questions a lot, because that's how you get someone in the community going, oh, I need to be working on whatever it might be. All right, that's how Signal happened, right? People needed secure communications. And so there's a space here for being able to ask these questions. I mean, I don't know that Slack is bad or Facebook, well, Facebook, whatever. I don't know that Slack is necessarily bad. It's not necessarily very transparent about what happens to that data, but they are transparent about the fact they can't read your data, right? Aren't they transparent about the fact that it's, I'm pretty sure Slack is transparent about the fact that they can't read your data, right? You can, and the people in the group can. I believe that's the deal. But again, you do need to start to think about that. But I think we're at a reset point with respect to these tools, which is why your question is well observed. I can't immediately say, oh, go use X. I could say use Signal for groups. Whether or not that's going to work for you, I don't know yet. But these are soluble problems.
Thank you, Mark. Maybe lunch wasn't such a good idea. I recognize that Facebook is a black hole in size and scope, but are we confusing it as a driver rather than as a symptom in the case of it just building a better mousetrap of turning citizens into consumers? Well, shouldn't we work on the bigger problem?
These things co-evolve. You're going to have trouble changing people's minds when they're all connected into a global mind control machine, right? So I mean, you can say
that again. That's a very good line.
Yeah. Well, but you're going to have trouble changing people's minds when everyone is plugged into a global mind control machine. Yeah. Well, no. But that Facebook was the mass medium experiment in that, right? In cognitive bias, there's no question around that. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, Fox was the mass medium experiment in cognitive bias amplification. And then right-wing talk radio before that, which goes back to the fairness doctrine. And yes, we know where the things went wrong now. We know where the bodies are buried. And I don't want to say we have to boil the ocean, because I think you're right. That's probably not the right way to do it. There are many different paths to freeing people's minds. You've got to free people's minds, but you've also got to be able to leave them in a space where they can continue to have agency. And if you free someone's mind, or you let them free their mind and you stick them back in the matrix again, sorry for the horrible metaphors, but you are.
Paraphrase popular laws, to what extent that can we use the master's tools?
I'm going to, and you make an extremely interesting point here, because So one of the things I did in New York was go sit and have a long coffee yesterday afternoon with a literary agent because I want to do a book version of this. And she was really pushing me, particularly around this point. I'm going to present you a completely different view of what Facebook could be in the world in terms of using the master's tools. Facebook has a simulacrum of all of us, right? Sort of, but it's almost a behavioral simulacrum, but it is a behavioral simulacrum. And you ask people who are deep in UI, and they'll say, look, Facebook knows me better than I know myself. It knows all of my bad patterns, and in fact, maybe helps me lean into them. What if Facebook said, you know, advertising is not a great way to make money. Wellness, medicine is a better way to make money. We have all this data. We can actually work with you. We can be the benevolent AI in the cloud that's helping us all make all of the right decisions. And I know that's my own digital Pollyanna, right? I get that. Huh? No, I get that. But when you have a global mind control machine, right, you could use it for other things. Can you use it to send a message through it, to amplify a message that changes the essential nature of that machine? Well, that is a very good question to ask, and I think the right people to ask that question to are artists, because artists are very good at being able to provide interventions that make the system conscious of its activity.
Right. Pro-artist. Not as totally pro the frame that you just gave us, and I'm curious about that, because earlier you were just saying that we're sort of sold on these, you know, every time. It could be industrial ag, it could be, you know, the 90s or whatever it is. We're sold on, look at the shiny object that we love, and let's go here and do that thing, and then we get all the dystopia that goes with it. And so now you've just described one of those. What if Facebook were a wellness engine? Well, I don't want my boss to be my wellness engine, which is already happening. Like, and they don't really know what wellness means, and they will screw it up in the same way. And so I'm kind of curious. Like that doesn't really.
Look, it's
more of a comment than a question.
No. I mean, it's there's a lot of nuance there that was not covered by that around the construction of wellness and the culture and all of that stuff. And you know, I don't mean to gloss over any of that, but I'm saying there's different ways of thinking about what if the only end of mind control is getting you to look at more ads, in some ways that's innocuous, but the side effect of that is it's a cognitive bias amplifier, and that isn't innocuous, right? And so we kind of have to look at, well, are there other things that you can take a mind control engine for? But it is a mind control engine. That's the problem, right? I mean, are we going to junk it? If Facebook junks it, that doesn't matter. Everyone else has learned how to make one. This is weird. We are in a post-bomb era. We have to live with the bomb now. And so part of what we need to do is develop a real politic for it.
First, Facebook actually has run some experiments to that effect with a professor, I believe, at Northeastern, where they were trying to get people to get along across political lines. I don't know how far that experiment went, but it did happen.
Did they at least inform the experimentees this time?
No.
Okay. Well, this is when they were editing the news feeds in 2014. That's what done them. I can't believe they made the same mistake again. Please, go on.
Actually, it was around the same timeline, I think, that I heard about this.
All right, fair enough.
And the other is you went on about the augmented reality.
Yeah.
Given the continual failure of consumers to pick up augmented reality in a wearable form,
right?
Why do you think it'll pick up in the future? Google Glass has already failed. The Snap Specs have failed. I don't see much of a future for the Microsoft one either.
So the Snap Specs weren't AR. They're just sort of a photographic device. I mean, Glass, I agree with you. Glass failed. It's used well in an industrial capacity. HoloLens is really only being marketed to enterprise right now. Okay. Have you heard of a company called Magic Leap? Magic Leap. Okay, so Magic Leap is probably the best funded startup in history. You haven't heard of them yet. They've already raised $2 billion of investment from Google, from Alibaba. I think SoftBank has just gone in for about 400 million, 500 million. And they are making these spectacles. And when these spectacles come to market, yes, maybe they'll fail. They will be marketed to you as the natural successor to the smartphone. They will be. There's so much energy going into this. And Zuckerberg is definitely working on it. This is one of the long-term goals of the acquisition of Oculus, was to build the necessary tools to be able to do this. So I agree with you. Maybe they'll fail. I think by the time they get to the form factor that most consumers will be seeing them, they will be providing a level of utility that the smartphone can't, because the smartphone is not editing the reel for you. And so at that level of the utility, and part of this is we've created an extremely data-rich world. It's so data-rich that most of the time we aren't aware of the data that we're soaking in all the time. And we've gotten to a point now where we actually want to be soaking in that a little bit more, and that's the device that enables that. Now, you know, McLuhan always talked about the fact that you always, when you scratch a technological itch, you tend to make the itch worse. And this may in fact be that, but this seems to be the direction things are going in. The original examples we saw, it's funny because Google Glass failed, but it wasn't a quiet failure, was it? There was an actual moment in the culture where the word glass hole got coined, right? Because people saw, particularly with the Cylon LED on it, which meant you were being recorded and uploaded to Skynet, people saw, it made very apparent the surveillance nature of augmented reality as a medium. And it was the first time for people, and I think people found that extremely confronting. We're now going to be a decade longer, and those things aren't going to be seen as shocking anymore. So I think there's a lot of that in there as well. Some of that was the shock of the news. Some of that was the fact that the device didn't do enough for the people who were wearing it, I think, to draw enough people in. But these are all learning steps along the way. But you're absolutely right. It might get out there and just bomb.
Hey, so my name is Mark, and I'm working on a chatbot that kind of works across text message and Facebook Messenger. So I guess actually one thought, I think Apple has patents for contact lenses that have a gash layer in it, so that could handle it, so it could handle projection. So eventually contact lenses could be a thing.
Yeah.
But so I guess one other component of this world that I wanted to bring up was the private conversation between people in like Facebook Messenger, and how the platform has opened up recently to developers being able to enter into like group conversations and one-on-one conversations. So if you're talking about music, it could be like, hey, share something from Spotify. So it's kind of interesting how, so I've been kind of thinking like, okay, well, how can I, as a tool that's connected to the local governments, kind of inject myself into these group conversations?
Yep.
And also how can I, once I'm present there and I realize I'm using natural language processing to recognize you're giving away personal information, you should move to signal or text messaging.
Yeah.
So I think that's another feed of surveillance, and also a place where you might be able to inject and move people off.
Although you do have to wonder, again, inviting someone to move off platform is not going to make the platform owner happy, and so you may have to negotiate that. I mean, I don't know, but I think this idea of being able to put that intelligence in is very well observed if it can help guide people through this and maybe be less automatic in their use of this. I think all of that tends to help.
Fascinating conversation, and I appreciate your writing. So, my name is Dorian. I'm wondering if to me, Facebook, sort of dovetailing off something Mika said, and what's been said by others as well. The Facebook to me is a wonderful focus because it's so dominant. But to think that it's the place that's because you and I could both draw a diagram of the data that's being collected from display, DSPs thrown into data management platforms, thrown back out to SSPs, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I'm just thinking, is it right to? There's so many different questions. Is it game over? Is government regulation really the answer?
I mean, Facebook is a very convenient example, right? But as I say, this technology is now part of the technological mix of 21st century civilization. Facebook in some ways got to a particularly potent mix of it first, but that's just it. It's just first. So the Chinese social credit system, have you guys talked about that here yet? You all know about it?
You should say a bit more.
Okay.
I'd love to hear more about it.
All right, so the Chinese government, in cahoots with BAT, so Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, are constructing what they call the social credit system, so that every Chinese citizen will effectively have a rating of their citizenship ability, if I can coin that very weird word, all right, based on all of their interactions in the social sphere online. So if you post something to Weibo that is lovely and supports the state, you get points. And if you post something that is maybe either dissenting or against the party line, you'll lose points. And your worth with respect to China's institutions will be gauged by that social credit number. And so it's this totalizing influence. And the thing is that we have two things going on here. I want to so the surveillance authoritarianism, which Zainab has been very clear on and very eloquent on, but I'm also seeing the other side of this, which is surveillance utopianism, which is that, oh, we're going to get you to do the right things because we have a metric and we can actually accelerate into that. And I see Facebook as being exceptionally good at that kind of surveillance utopianism. You're getting exactly the world you want to see. But the Chinese will be able to do this too, and I suspect that the Chinese in the longer term will move from a surveillance authoritarianism into a surveillance utopianism because, again, Orwell was great for the 20th century. It looks like Huxley is better for the 21st. Yeah.
I mean, okay, so you're kind of saying it is game over.
Well, I'm saying this is forces. I mean, was it game over when we invented the bomb? No.
Okay.
At least not this week.
Not yet.
Right, and that's all we get.
Okay, so let's say, I've already got my biochip implant. I'm not even going to bother with the glasses.
Right. Yeah.
And
people are definitely working hard on that.
And that means that, my ability to speak Chinese is greatly enhanced, and you're at a competitive disadvantage if you don't.
Yeah.
And I don't want that taken away from me.
Yeah.
So really is it feasible to think that government regulation will be the answer, is the answer? Are there commercial answers? That's a huge question. It's kind of the topic. But
Well, okay.
so is regulation really the answer? And
Right. So, part of it is we need the space to think and to feel because we can develop our own moral sense of what works for us and then collectively develop ethical senses and ethical frameworks and then behaviors and customs, and then really at that point you start to think about laws. And in a lot of ways, we are only at the beginning of that conversation of understanding what's right for us, both I think as individuals and as collections of individuals in communities and cultures. And so I think if we get those basics right, then the hard questions you're asking get not easy to answer, but easier to answer. And so I think in a lot of ways, and why I want to talk to you guys, because I think this is really around having a conversation and a think right now. What's right, what's wrong? We've seen how things can go off. Okay, we don't want to make those mistakes again. How do we learn from those mistakes in ways that are actionable as individuals and as groups?
Hi, I'm Doug.
Hi, Doug.
I've become interested again in the ideas of like Douglas Engelbart and Ted Nelson and the kind of hacker ethic. And when you mention the bomb,
Yeah.
it occurs to me that like this is a bomb that doesn't exist if people don't take part in it. I wonder if it's time for, now that people are kind of conscious of Facebook's overreach and its effect on our society and the political impact it's had this last year, is it time to revive those kind of whole earth catalog ideas and try to advance something new?
Okay, so China Miéville, the science fiction writer, last year, I think it was right after the election, said we need to utopia as hard as we can. And I think it's interesting because what has happened, what I've seen over the last year is that people who have been deeply involved in technology have been having a real moment. So one of my really good friends in San Francisco, and I tweeted this after she said it, because she said it to me privately, so it's not a tribute. She said, I've spent the last 20 years in technology, and I feel like all I've done is build a megaphone for Orange Hitler. All right? And it was one of those moments that just sort of took my breath away, because I think that there's a real moment here for us, and it's not just one person. It feels like it's broad. It feels like there's, if not a consensus, at least there's a new clear-eyedness about what we've done and what we should be doing. And so I think this is exactly the moment. I mean, PDF is one of the places where that conversation happens. And so I think there's a real moment to be able to start to have these discussions. And this is my year this year has been having these discussions with people that I know in the field. How are they feeling? What would they do? And some people have given up, right? I mean, not given up, but they just don't know quite what to do. But I feel like let's have the conversation, let's have the think, and feel like that's the beginning of us having any agency about this. But I think, again, the idea of having the index of tools and all of this that the Whole Earth Catalog provided to sort of rethink what civilizational goals are, we have amazing resources to be able to do shared knowledge, commons-based work now that we didn't have even 15 years ago. So a lot of this work can happen very quickly, and part of it is that we're so busy putting out so many fires on so many fronts now. I mean, this is the biggest thing.
I actually wanted to ask you about
Yeah.
working or not. So one of the things that you talked, I had it on backwards, now it's working. One of the things that you talked about in a talk you gave at PDF, where you first introduced Anonymous to us, and you talked about how Anonymous had gone to war against Scientology, and you were theorizing about what happens when a distributed group of people take on a centralized institution. We've seen that with WikiLeaks.
Gamergate.
Right. And you suggested that the world that we were heading to was going to be the Hobbesian war of all against all. And there have been many times in the last year and a half where I've thought that's the world we're in now, where every day, whether it's a big international or national thing that we're being distracted by, or the Orange Menace and his latest tweet, or some very microcosm. I mean, and maybe this is more true on the left in the United States than on the right in the United States, but there seems to also be a fragmentation into very thin slivers of ideology, belief, righteousness. And so the war of all against all seems to be worsening. Now, sometimes it does help to just name a problem and to get people to stop and go, wait, oh, that's what I'm doing. Maybe I don't want to do that. But we're all we're collectively polluting the attention commons to the point where we can't even see it for what we're doing. Somebody in this room.
What's the outrage of the day?
Well, somebody in this room is working on a really great video, which is going to have a powerful story about some wonderful thing that some group is doing. And when they put it out into the world, they're hoping that it gets out there to as many people as possible. But the problem is, it means it's taking away attention from 100 million other worthy things. And we've only multiplied the number of people who can speak today. What we do not have are better tools for listening and aggregating around ideas when we don't already agree about them. And I don't know how I keep saying that we need better tools for coordination and collaboration than we currently have, and we need government to step in with its convening power, because it is the only institution in society that has that kind of convening power, with all the problems that come with government. But I don't see any other way through. And in the meantime, I think we're distracting ourselves to death, as Neil Postman warned. You don't disagree?
Well, I mean, no, it's not even that I disagree. I mean, I think we can agree that all of these things are problems, all right? We also have to sort of acknowledge that we're inside of a difference amplifier. And so all of these, right? And so all of these things feel bigger than they might if we didn't live inside of a difference amplifier, all right? Now, the internet, just by its nature, is kind of that kind of amplifier, but when you couple machine learning to it, which is what we've done, then it goes to 11. And so part of it is maybe we need to sort of back away from that. I think part of it is we as individuals maybe need to be satisfied that the work that we're doing to make the world better, as small or constrained as that's good, and be satisfied around that. Maybe there's some, is it a conceit, or is it FOMO? I don't know, that we need to be across every outrage. And they're all coming across in the Facebook or in the Twitter or whatever, and we need to have some stance on it rather than going, okay, I'm glad there are great people working on that. I might even know some of them. You have my blessing, go on, right? Maybe you throw them a couple of bucks or whatever. But do we maybe want to, and a phenomenon of the 21st century world is we're really distracted, so we can't stick to our knitting doing the things we do well. Okay. We need to, let me go back to the 30,000 foot level on this. A decade ago, we were not all connected all of the time because smartphones didn't exist yet, right? We had feature phones. You remember how much, I mean, you didn't spend 10 hours a day staring into a feature phone because it just wasn't that damn interesting, right? We do now, and so we are constantly fed with all of this stuff from all of this. And so some of that's just, we lost our bearing in that. And I always ask people to give themselves a pass because it was a kind of informational tsunami washed up, and we all got carried away. We're now all seeing the result of that because we've all been washed up on this really weird distant shore with all of this other stuff going on. And maybe we can start to have a conversation about how to dial that back and how that would work and what that would mean personally in our relationships and in our practices and all of that. That would, I think, also help, but that's around a level of consciousness and self-consciousness around this that is hard when you're living inside of a difference amplifier. So I can only agree with you, but I think that there are ways to remediate it.
Yes, hard in a difference amplifier. Also, it's an addictive difference amplifier. It's designed to keep us attached to it.
Yes.
And of course, it's economically feasible.
Well,
so some people are starting to say, well, maybe we should do a different kind of design, but not that many.
Yeah.
So I think, we're still to say, I think there's always a lot of this kind of, well, we have our better digital health and I actually turn off, I'll disconnect from some of these things periodically, but that's not going to solve it because it's a much bigger, I think it goes back to your thing about all the people having the moment of awakening, which of course some of us maybe had a little earlier and was like, oh, well, just waiting for you guys to catch up. But, I think, where is the leverage point at which that can be switched? Because both economics, power, pretty much everything is aligned in favor of this continued engine to keep going, I feel, so.
So, well, what's super interesting here is that 12 and 13-year-olds are not on the Facebook. They're on their own private networks, and I think it's because they took a look at us and went, holy shit, right? And they're not anywhere near any of this. They're on Instagram. The 12-year-olds probably, maybe the 17-year-olds, 12-year-olds tend to be on their own private networks with friends, right? And so there's a degree of, or whatever. I'm not quite sure, but there seems to be different approaches that's maybe generational around this. I don't know, and some of that's worth looking at.
This is just a fun anecdote, but I was in a cell phone store to replace my cell phone at one point, and there was a father with his two daughters, and one of his daughters had just hit, her bat mitzvah, and she's getting a cell phone for her bat mitzvah, and the younger daughter was hanging around, and I was like, let me just chat with her because she's kind of being neglected in this. I said, so do you want to do that? And she was like, nah, I don't know. Everybody's stuck on it and they're not talking to each other and I'm not sure if I want that. So she can see it from her angle, and that is somewhat reassuring or hopeful, but it's just one a moment.
I only have anecdote. I don't have data on that yet, but I have a lot of anecdote. At some point anecdote becomes anecdata. It doesn't become real data.
Hey, so just a quick thought, and along a somewhat fun line, you and I were back and forthing before the premiere of Westworld, and I'm wondering your thoughts on that. When I went with a bunch of people to Blade Runner, I actually offered that I thought that Westworld was it had a greater canvas, but I thought it was a much more sophisticated take than 2049 and where we might be going.
Okay, well, I love 2049. It's not a perfect film, but it's still a masterpiece. And it's a masterpiece because the replicants are all more human than any of the humans.
Oh, I haven't seen it yet.
It just nailed it. Well, I haven't given anything away. Westworld, I could only get to episode 3, and it was so brutal I haven't finished watching it yet.
I hated Westworld.
Right? Because there's just something about it that particularly at the time I was watching it, where I was in my own head. Right? So it's very hard for me to. But the thing is that both are playing with the idea of simulation and humanity and what humanity is and what empathy is. Both of them are very much on this spot. I mean, it's almost as though Sherry Turkle did a script revision of 2049. No, seriously, because there's a lot of aspects of alienation and technologically mediated alienation that feature prominently in 2049, right? Because they're now part of how we as a culture, and the best science fiction is always a mirror on the present, right? So there's a lot of how we see ourselves being reflected back in that.
Yeah.
Just one note of hope, and speaking of 12 and 13-year-olds, back in the 80s, it might have been inspired by Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, I don't know, but there was a librarian in Connecticut that started what later became National TV Turnoff Week. And last time I checked, which was more than 10 years ago, was in 50,000 high schools. It's probably almost every high school now. So I'm thinking that there could be an inoculation / school board right-left coalition as one of the possible solutions or one of the tools that could be used to inoculate kids against this menace.
Yeah, I mean, the digital Sabbath is a big and growing thing now. I mean, there's a lot of different tools around this. A TV turnoff week, what does that mean in the era of Netflix? That's also a question we need to ask, right? Because in some ways, the field of the availability of video has become totalizing. Kids will often spend time watching YouTube and watching people on YouTube, and they won't watch broadcast or even Netflix. Okay, so we do really need to reframe that, and we're going to need to reframe why this is a good thing, because again, the lack of connectivity is seen, and rightfully so, as being somewhat dangerous. You cannot summon help if you're disconnected. Right, we had this whole phenomenon. Australia's got huge amounts of bush, and there's no cell phone towers in it, and country people would wander off into the bush and consistently were getting lost for a couple of years because they didn't know they wouldn't have Google Maps when they got away from a cell tower. Right? So it's that kind of thing where there's a lot of stuff that's become the trope of connectivity as being a good thing, too, that you have to work out how do you speak to that.
Yeah. One last round. Did anybody else have comments, thoughts, reactions, people who haven't spoken, who've just been listening intently, doing their email? Sanda. Sanda, you work with high schoolers. I mean, how much of this resonates for you in
I work with young people, so high school juniors and seniors in youth civic engagement initiatives, and they are civically engaged in that they care about things, but I don't think that they're thinking about a lot of this. And so I've been thinking, in listening to you, what is the way to bring this to them in a way that doesn't that makes them appropriately paranoid, like paranoid in a way that they can take action, but not be either so overwhelmed that they just don't listen at all.
And you folks were ready for it, so you got a very sort of, here's the fire hose version. I also had 15 minutes. I couldn't sort of roll it into a happy story. But I think when you're talking to communities outside this core, you just talk about, how do you feel when you're using this tool, right? Make them conscious of that. Go, that part of the design of the tool is to make you feel this way, right? It's a very gentle story, but if it helps them, then they actually have the capacity to build their own internal skills for that.
Absolutely. We definitely talk with them about manipulation and sort of how to be self-directed and critical thinkers about all of this stuff. So, and the good news is none of them are on Facebook. They're definitely very post-Facebook, so you don't need to worry about that with teenagers.
Right. Okay.
All right, so maybe there's an optimistic end to the story, that just the natural evolution. Though I have to say, everything about the augmented reality pitch that's coming, and whether it'll be easy to resist the charms of that, I mean, you've certainly put that on our radar.
And keep in mind, this is, I've been working in virtual reality for 27 years, so this is very much me seeing my life's work now going in a direction where I'm like, that does not make me happy.
What did you think the promise was, if that's been your life's work?
So, I mean, this is a long question, but, both virtual reality and augmented reality give you an interesting control of space. And one of the things that really got me very excited very early on was we're going to need, and this is 25 years ago, we're going to need really good tools for planetary management so that we can see things at a scale we can't because we're only human scale. And you have, Google Earth is sort of like the bad version of that. You can see buildings, but can I see flows of sewage or flows of energy or all of the other things we'd want to understand to be able to sort of see what's my life in the city like? Right? What's my life in my community or my nation? We have the capacity to do that in our tools now. There just hasn't been any sort of financial systems built around product systems built around being able to deliver that. But I always imagined that those things would be core to civic engagement, because the things that you can see, and one reason why civic government, like local government, is the level of government tends to be in Australia and in America that's not broken, because people are connected to it, right? It's quite tangible and visible, but the layers above it have seemed to have gotten so distant that people feel it's a projection for them, right, about the things that they don't have or don't have. So that was sort of one side of where I wanted to be able to do things with VR. In my earliest work, if you go to webearth.org, you'll see this thing. It's for 20 years. It's in the current generation of the technology, but it's a live view of the Earth from space now with the clouds and everything. And it's like, that's what I wanted 20 years ago. Augmented reality should be able to give us that, but completely mixed in, right? So that we actually have this real-time view.
Right. NASA actually has a display, which I saw in the big science museum in San Francisco recently, and it shows, I think it's 6 months worth of global pollutants as they move daily and in real time.
Yeah.
And it's a phenomenal visualization of the problem of climate change.
And the CSIRO, so I know the folks at, which is Australia's sort of science academy, they're doing this around fires, so bushfires and whatnot, and how those pollutants spread through the atmosphere as well.
My name's Ken. So I'm thinking a lot about what I'm left thinking about. Ready Player One coming out. I'm thinking about Mind Flayer from Stranger Things 2. This kind of ethos of surveillance. But I'm also thinking about power, right? And I'm wondering what shifts power. I'm thinking about, I'm very involved in Harlem where I live. 5-10 years from now, conversations about work and job opportunities, and I'm thinking about what is going to. There are conversations that folks are having around design, and it's a very small segment, but thinking about redesigning these tools, but just agency in this process as folks get spoken around, and then I'm also thinking about yesterday and the shuttering of DNA Info and the shuttering of Gothamist, and I'm thinking about local voices being stripped because guess what? People have lots of money and they can do whatever the F they want with it. So I guess I'm just wondering where power fits into this broader conversation and how you actually empower in the future and give agency to the people who are affected the most.
So, one thing we know, and I am clearly going to be not the first person to say this on the stage, data is power, right? And the more that you can have agency over both the collection of your data and the use of your data, the more space there is for being able to do things. And I think we need to think about that. I think people have sort of signed off on the loss of privacy, which I find depressing, but except, I'll sit there and the train broke down, or there was a medical emergency on the train, and I immediately took Google Maps out so I could walk up to a different station and catch a different train line. And that was the bargain, and yet Google always knows where I am. By the way, and I have a question here. You have all these lovely Wi-Fi towers in the roads in downtown, right? So you get free Wi-Fi when you're walking around downtown. The little node things you can charge your phone at. Who put those up?
Yeah, so that's
Is that sidewalk?
Yes, and intersection and sidewalk.
No, Toronto's pushing back. I'm going to connect Mika, in fact, with the people in Toronto.
Yes.
Yes, Toronto is about to push back, and I was talking to the folks who are doing
those were put up. Those were put up in and then have come under a lot of criticism for the amount of data they were originally set up to collect.
Well, I'm assuming they're grabbing my Mac ID every time I walk by one because I logged on to one, and now they can. They would be doing it either way.
They may still be doing that, yeah. How else do you think you're going to get free high-speed Wi-Fi, huh?
And this is so right, exactly. So but the thing is, when I was walking around downtown, I had this moment where I thought the deal the city should have struck is, if you can bring that to the city's poorest neighborhood, we will let you put it in the city's richest neighborhood. That's the deal. Because a lot of people in a poor neighborhood would benefit from access to high quality municipal Wi-Fi everywhere, right? In a way that people who already got don't need more of, right? And I feel like just asking those kinds of questions to power allows you to reframe things. It's a silly little thing, but at the same time, it's an important thing. There aren't any. I don't have any easy answers around power other than to recognize it, because from what we know from Michel Foucault is the first thing power tries to do is it tries to hide itself. So part of the job is to continuously just expose it and keep it moving rather than forcing you to move.
The other lesson, and this is Eric Liu, who was actually here a couple months ago with his book, You're More Powerful Than You Think, which is the idea that when we organize, we create new power, that it's not a limited resource, and that it's possible to mobilize and push back. The problem of financial power and the idea that all these companies that think of themselves as disruptive initially maybe are, and then sell out to the biggest power system that we have, which is the financial system, when they IPO, and then their values are completely governed by the values of the market, whatever. I mean, we have the residue of founder values as long as the founders are still in control of their companies. But that, obviously it's too late for Facebook to undo its business model. It's so successful, they would never alter that, because their stock price would crash.
I mean, it's not even clear they could transition because the price would crash during a transition, right? You can see that's happening to IBM right now. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Oh, all right. Maybe a few more minutes, we can go.
So we're actually entrepreneurs in residence here, and we have a startup called Pluto.life. And so we're sort of a data company that specializes in social impact data, starting with diversity and inclusion. And so one thing a challenge we had very early on was, how do we align our business model with practices that will push us in the direction of being able to preserve that while we scale, which has also been helped from even being in this community. We've heard this before. So being here in Civic Hall also helped us, I think, at this critical time as well. And sort of, I guess maybe that's one. So we don't yet delve into AR or VR, but I think really the most tangible aspect for startups and businesses to appreciate this is to be very, very careful with what their business model is, and if at all possible, try to close off future problems now. So like one thing we've done is we've made a commitment to not sell personal information. And so that, of course, is one core way. Other companies, for instance, there's a company that scrapes your emails in return for
Google.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, there's Google as well, yeah. But some of the plugins, for instance, there's a plugin, for instance, that will help you opt out of subscriptions. And so one of the things they did was they scraped everyone's emails, offered it for free, and then they, without telling people, sold to Uber and Lyft the percentage of customers that had both platforms from reading the emails, right? So, and so I guess from our perspective, we're a very small startup, but we've already taken, I guess the things that we've tried to do, even from an early stage, are mostly in sort of alignment. And sort of like one of the things we've also done is if you bring up your browser's console log, whenever you use our website, you can see everything we send to
That's nice. Thank you.
To
That's
any
really
platform.
Nice. Yeah.
So you can see we currently have Google Analytics, and so we if you log in, it's Pluto.life, by the way, and if you flip your console log on, you'll actually be able to see it. You see a message from us, and then every event, it says, hey, this is an event, this is what we've shown, and we've tried to make that information as siloed as possible.
The program in me is really, really appreciative. That is beautiful. Yeah.
And then also do not track standards. So if you turn your do not track on, we respect all of it. It actually gives you a pop-up that says like, hey Ninja, like we've got your back. But and the thing is, even if you're logged into our service, we still don't collect that extra data. So the Electronic Frontier Foundation worked with Medium to devise their practice. Yeah. Sorry, I'm like hijacking this, but anyway. But thank you very much for the talk, and it's awesome.
I mean, I think what I would ask you to do is actually to be quite, I guess, public and document all of this, or if you haven't done it, document all of this, because then it becomes a practice I can point other people to. It's like, here's a framework for thinking about these things if you want to be doing the right things that maybe don't cause trouble for you later with your great startup.
Right. There's actually the Stanford PACS program on civil society and technology has a statement about 4 principles of protecting digital civil society, because they're trying to get a conversation going among civil society organizations about what data they collect and what they do with it. And I'm not going to be able to recite all 4 off the top of my head, but permission is one of them, so that, you know, inherent to whatever you do, you're asking and obtaining permission. Another is don't collect what you can't protect. Which in an age of hacking is a pretty good one. And I think that's, you know, another step here is, can we build a more ethical set of approaches so that, and I love that it's rubbing off on you from being here at Civicall, that's great. But we should make these things more explicit. And at least, you know, it's not the full Hippocratic oath in practice of doing no harm, but at least do less harm, as little harm as possible.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I know the folks who have designed a lot of the infrastructure for tracking all of the vehicles in Auckland, because they do all the traffic management. The designer of the system designed it so that it doesn't store any of the data. It just runs from snapshot to snapshot to snapshot. So it's what they call stateless in programming terms, all right? But what it means is that he can never get a subpoena for anyone to say, you know, where was this vehicle at this time, because he doesn't have that information. He doesn't need to be the custodian of that information. So it's actually possible as a design principle, not just as a business principle, but as a design principle, to think about that as a design goal. How do I not hold on to this data, because that data then gets to be problematic?
Writ large, that would mean convincing Google to throw away all the old email after 30 days or some minimum number that they keep, and then the rest just gets junked. Of course, we're all there because they gave us free storage forever and ever. Was somebody raising a hand? If not, I'm going to actually bring things to a close. Really, thank you so much, Mark. This is great food for
all
thought.
Awesome, thank you.
And how do we follow you and your work here on your website? And you're on the Twitter, right?
At Pesce, not Mark Pesce, at Pesce on Twitter.
Okay.
And Next Billion Seconds podcast, you can get that on iTunes and all your favorite podcasting apps.
So that podcast is up. Great. Really, really terrific. We're going to keep struggling with these questions. I should mention that we have 2 more book talks coming up. One, I think, on November 27th. They're all on the theme of tech and power, which this is obviously about too. The 27th is with Franklin Foer and Zephyr Teachout. His new book, World Without Mind, which is very in tune with the ideas we've been discussing today. And then I think on December 13th, I'll be talking with Noam Cohen about his new book, The Know-It-Alls, which is a kind of intellectual history of the leading lights of Silicon Valley, the men, and they are all men, who have built all of these companies and how they all came out of Stanford, and basically libertarianism run amok. It's good to know who the overlords are and how they think, and it cuts through a lot of the self-congratulatory marketing that is done on their behalf to make them look so benevolent. At least we've reached the point of peak indifference to these problems. I think we're past that now, and I think we are now reaching into a moment where lots more people are like admitting, oh God, this is a new, doesn't displace the old ones that are just as important, but it's a new and serious one too. So thank you again, Mark. Thanks everybody for joining us for lunch.
Thank you, guys.
Stay connected.